Dr. Margaret Chen had dedicated her entire life to healing others, performing miracles in operating rooms across the country. Her hands had saved countless lives, mended broken bones, and restored hope to families who had lost it. Yet, the one person she couldn't heal was the one who mattered most, her 17-year-old daughter, Sarah. Born with spina bifida, Sarah had spent her entire life in a wheelchair, watching the world from a different perspective than most. The irony wasn't lost on either of them. The renowned surgeon who could fix anyone couldn't fix her own child. Sarah had grown up in the sterile halls of medical facilities, surrounded by the constant hum of machines and the antiseptic smell that seemed to follow her mother everywhere. She had undergone countless surgeries, each one promising hope but delivering only temporary relief or minor improvements. The doctor spoke in clinical terms about nerve damage, spinal cord complications, and the permanent nature of her condition. Her mother's colleagues were kind but realistic, their gentle smiles masking the truth they all knew: Sarah would never walk. Despite the medical verdict, Sarah possessed a spirit that couldn't be confined to her wheelchair. She excelled in her studies, particularly in literature and creative writing, finding solace in stories of ordinary people doing extraordinary things. Her bedroom walls were covered with quotes from her favorite books, and she spent hours crafting her own tales of adventure and possibility. Yet, deep down, she harbored a secret dream that she dared not voice, the dream of feeling grass beneath her feet, of running through the rain, of dancing at her senior prom. The family's routine was well-established and comfortable, if somewhat predictable. Margaret would leave for the hospital before dawn, often not returning until well past dinner. Sarah's days were filled with homeschooling sessions with her tutor, Mrs. Rodriguez, physical therapy appointments, and long afternoons spent writing in the garden behind their suburban home. The garden had been Margaret's gift to her daughter, a place of beauty and tranquility where Sarah could escape the medical world that dominated their lives. On this particular autumn morning, as golden leaves danced outside her window, Sarah felt an unusual restlessness. Something was stirring within her, a sense that change was coming, though she couldn't articulate what or how. She had no way of knowing that her life was about to intersect with someone who would challenge everything she had been told about limitations, possibility, and the power of unwavering faith in the impossible. The community center where Sarah volunteered twice a week served meals to the homeless and provided a safe space for those who had nowhere else to go. It was here that she found purpose beyond her own circumstances, helping serve food and organizing donated books for the small library corner. The work gave her a sense of contribution that her medical appointments and treatments never could. She had been volunteering there for 2 years, and the regulars had become like an extended family to her. It was on a particularly cold Tuesday that she first noticed him, a boy who appeared to be about her age, sitting alone in the corner with a worn backpack clutched tightly against his chest. His clothes were layers of mismatched items, clearly assembled from various donations, but his eyes held an intensity that set him apart from the others. While most of the visitors kept to themselves or gathered in small groups, this boy seemed to be observing everything and everyone with the focus of someone searching for something specific. Marcus had been on the streets for 3 months, ever since aging out of the foster care system with nowhere to go. Unlike many of the others seeking shelter and meals, he carried with him an unusual gift that he barely understood himself. Since childhood, he had experienced moments where he could sense things about people's bodies, their pain, their ailments, their potential for healing. It wasn't something he could control or fully explain, and it had gotten him into trouble more than once, when well-meaning adults thought he was making up stories or seeking attention. When Sarah wheeled over to offer him a second serving of soup, Marcus looked up and immediately felt something different. The sensation was unlike anything he had experienced before, not the usual awareness of illness or injury, but something that felt more like possibility. He studied her face, noting the determination in her eyes and the way she carried herself with dignity despite her circumstances. There was strength there, he realized, a kind of inner power that had nothing to do with physical ability. "You're different," Marcus said quietly, his voice barely audible over the chatter of the dining hall. Sarah paused, uncertain how to respond. She was used to people noticing her wheelchair, used to the awkward glances and overly cheerful attempts at conversation. But something in his tone suggested he wasn't talking about her disability. Different how? She asked, genuinely curious. Marcus hesitated, unsure how to explain what he was sensing, without sounding crazy. I don't know yet, he admitted. But I think you're supposed to walk. The words hung in the air between them, simple yet profound, spoken with a certainty that made Sarah's heart skip a beat for reasons she couldn't explain. Over the following weeks, Marcus became a regular at the community center, and Sarah found herself looking forward to their conversations. He possessed an unusual wisdom for someone his age, speaking about life with the depth of someone who had experienced far more than his years should have allowed. He told her stories of the people he had met on the streets, each tale revealing his remarkable ability to see beyond surface appearances to the heart of who people really were. It was during their third week of friendship that Marcus finally revealed the full extent of his unusual gift. They were sitting in the quiet corner of the community center, sharing a donated copy of The Secret Garden that Sarah had recommended, when he suddenly placed his hand near her leg, not touching, but close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his palm. I can feel things, he said softly, his eyes closed in concentration. About people's bodies, about what's wrong, and what's possible. I've been able to do it since I was little. Sarah's first instinct was skepticism. She had heard countless claims from well-meaning friends and strangers about miracle cures, faith healing, and alternative treatments that would fix her condition. Her mother had investigated every legitimate medical option, and Sarah had learned to protect herself from false hope. Yet something about Marcus was different. There was no desperation in his claim, no promise of instant results or requests for money. Instead, there was a quiet confidence, as if he were simply stating a fact about the weather. The doctors say my spinal cord is damaged, Sarah explained gently, not wanting to hurt his feelings but needing to be realistic. The nerves that control my legs were affected when I was born. It's permanent. Marcus nodded, his hand still hovering near her leg. I know what the doctors say, he replied. But I also know what I feel. And what I feel is that the connection is there. It's just sleeping, like it's waiting for the right moment to wake up. His words sent an unexpected shiver through Sarah's body, not of cold, but of something she dared not name. For 17 years, she had accepted her limitations, built her identity around them, and found peace with her circumstances. The idea that this might not be her permanent reality was both thrilling and terrifying. What if he was wrong? What if she allowed herself to hope and was disappointed once again? But what if he was right? What if the impossible was actually possible? That night, Sarah lay awake thinking about Marcus's words. She found herself imagining scenarios she had pushed away years ago, walking across the graduation stage, hiking through the mountains, dancing with someone special. The dreams felt dangerous, like opening a door she had carefully kept locked. Yet something had shifted in their conversation, a seed of possibility that had been planted despite her rational mind's protests. When Sarah mentioned her new friend to her mother over dinner, Dr. Margaret Chen's reaction was swift and protective. As a surgeon, she had seen too many desperate families fall victim to charlatans promising miraculous cures for incurable conditions. The medical world was full of well-documented cases where false hope had led to dangerous delays in proper treatment, financial exploitation, and devastating emotional crashes when reality finally set in. "Sweetheart, I know you want to believe," Margaret said gently, setting down her fork and reaching across the table to take Sarah's hand. "But we've been through this before. Remember the faith healer in Texas? The experimental treatment in Germany? The acupuncturist who claimed he could restore nerve function." Each mention brought back memories of trips that had ended in disappointment, of procedures that had promised everything and delivered nothing but false hope and mounting medical bills. Sarah understood her mother's concerns, but she also felt frustrated by the immediate dismissal. "This is different, Mom. Marcus isn't asking for money or making grand promises. He just says he can feel something that the doctors can't measure." Margaret's expression softened, recognizing the longing in her daughter's voice. She had spent 17 years trying to balance honesty with hope, never wanting to crush Sarah's spirit while also protecting her from unrealistic expectations. The conversation that followed was one they had danced around for years. Margaret spoke about the extensive testing Sarah had undergone as a child, the MRIs that clearly showed the spinal cord damage, the nerve conduction studies that confirmed the lack of signal transmission to her lower limbs. She explained the medical reality with the same gentle precision she used with her patients' families, presenting facts while acknowledging the emotional difficulty of acceptance. But Sarah was no longer the child who had accepted every medical pronouncement without question. She had grown into a young woman with her own thoughts and feelings about her condition, and she was beginning to realize that medical facts, while important, didn't necessarily represent the complete picture of human potential. "What if the tests don't show everything?" she asked. "What if there's something beyond what medical instruments can measure?" The question hung between them, representing not just a difference of opinion about Sarah's condition, but a fundamental disagreement about the nature of healing itself. Margaret represented the world of evidence-based medicine, of peer-reviewed studies and documented outcomes. Sarah was beginning to explore the possibility that healing might sometimes come from sources that couldn't be quantified or replicated in controlled studies. Neither was wrong, but they were approaching the same situation from entirely different frameworks of understanding. Despite her mother's reservations, Sarah continued to spend time with Marcus at the community center. She found herself drawn to his calm certainty, the way he spoke about possibilities as if they were simply waiting to be discovered. He never pressured her or made grand claims about instant healing. Instead, he talked about the human body as if it were a garden that sometimes needed the right conditions to bloom, rather than a machine with fixed and unchangeable parts. Marcus began sharing stories from his childhood, tales of moments when his unusual gift had manifested in ways that defied easy explanation. There was the elderly woman in his third foster home whose arthritis pain had diminished after he had simply sat with her, holding her hands while she told him stories about her late husband. There was the time he had somehow known exactly where to find a lost child in a crowded mall, guided by an inexplicable sense of the boy's location and emotional state. These weren't dramatic healings or mystical experiences, but rather quiet moments when something beyond the ordinary had occurred. Marcus spoke about them with the matter-of-fact tone of someone describing everyday events, which somehow made them more believable than if he had presented them as miraculous occurrences. Sarah began to understand that his gift wasn't about performing spectacular cures, but about sensing and nurturing the body's own capacity for healing and change. As their friendship deepened, Marcus began to work with Sarah in small ways. He would place his hands near her legs during their conversations, not claiming to heal her, but simply offering what he called listening with his hands. Sarah was surprised to find that these sessions brought her a sense of peace and comfort she hadn't expected. Whether anything physical was happening or not, the experience of being treated as if her body held possibilities rather than just limitations was profoundly moving. The changes were subtle at first. Sarah noticed that the chronic aches she had lived with for years seemed less pronounced after spending time with Marcus. Her sleep improved, and she found herself feeling more energetic and optimistic than she had in months. Her physical therapist commented on improved muscle tone and flexibility, though Sarah hadn't mentioned her sessions with Marcus to any of her medical team. Most significantly, Sarah began to dream about walking. These weren't the painful fantasies that had tormented her in earlier years, filled with longing and frustration. Instead, they were peaceful, natural dreams where she simply found herself standing and moving as if it were the most normal thing in the world. She would wake from these dreams not with disappointment, but with a curious sense of familiarity, as if she were remembering something rather than imagining it. 3 months into their friendship, Sarah began to experience sensations she had never felt before. It started as a tingling in her lower back, so slight that she initially dismissed it as imagination or wishful thinking. But the sensations persisted and gradually intensified, spreading along pathways that her medical team had declared permanently severed. She found herself afraid to mention these changes, worried that speaking about them might somehow make them disappear. The first person she told was Marcus, during one of their quiet sessions in the community center's garden. They had been working together for weeks now, with Marcus placing his hands just above her legs while they talked about books, dreams, and their hopes for the future. When she described the tingling sensations, his face lit up with a smile of quiet satisfaction, as if he had been waiting for exactly this news. "It's waking up," he said simply. The connection was always there, just dormant. Sometimes the body needs permission to heal, needs someone to believe in its possibility before it can remember what it's capable of. His certainty both thrilled and terrified Sarah. Part of her wanted to run to her mother with the news, while another part wanted to protect this fragile development from the skepticism she knew would greet it. Marcus suggested they increase their sessions, meeting daily if possible. Sarah agreed, making excuses to spend more time at the community center and arranging her schedule around their meetings. The sensations continued to develop, progressing from occasional tingles to more distinct feelings of warmth and, eventually, what felt unmistakably like the beginning of voluntary muscle control. The day Sarah felt her toe move was a moment she would remember for the rest of her life. It was such a small movement that anyone watching might have missed it entirely, but to her it felt like the earth had shifted. Marcus had been working with particular intensity that day, his hands moving in patterns that seemed to follow some internal guidance rather than any technique he had been taught. Suddenly, Sarah felt a rush of sensation down her right leg, followed by the unmistakable feeling of her big toe flexing. They both stared at her foot in amazement, hardly daring to breathe. "Try again," Marcus whispered. Sarah concentrated with every fiber of her being, visualizing the movement, willing it to happen. Slowly, deliberately, her toe moved again. Then her other toes joined in, and within minutes, she was flexing and pointing her foot with increasing control. The medical impossibility of what was happening seemed irrelevant in the face of its undeniable reality. That night, Sarah faced the most difficult decision of her young life. She could continue keeping this development secret, protecting it from medical scrutiny and skeptical family members, or she could share it with her mother and face whatever consequences might follow. The thought of disappointing Dr. Chun if this turned out to be temporary was almost unbearable, but the excitement of potentially sharing this miraculous development was equally compelling. Sarah's decision to tell her mother came during their usual Friday evening dinner, a weekly tradition they had maintained despite Margaret's demanding schedule. She had practiced the conversation in her mind dozens of times, trying to find words that would convey the reality of what was happening without sounding delusional or naive. But when the moment came, all her prepared speeches fled, and she simply said, "Mom, I need to show you something." The demonstration that followed challenged everything Dr. Margaret Chun thought she knew about medicine, anatomy, and the nature of healing itself. Watching her daughter move her feet and toes with deliberate control, Margaret's initial reaction was complete denial. She immediately began searching for rational explanations. Perhaps there had been a misdiagnosis years ago. Maybe the nerve damage hadn't been as complete as they had believed, or possibly this was some form of phantom movement that only appeared to be voluntary control. But as Sarah continued to demonstrate her newfound abilities, moving each toe individually and flexing her ankles with increasing confidence, Margaret was forced to confront the impossibility of what she was witnessing. Her medical training had taught her that severed spinal nerves didn't regenerate, that nerve damage like Sarah's was permanent and irreversible. Yet the evidence before her eyes contradicted everything she had learned in medical school and practiced for 20 years. The conversation that followed was intense and emotional. Margaret demanded to know exactly what had been happening, how long these changes had been occurring, and every detail about Sarah's interactions with Marcus. When she learned about the daily sessions, the hand placement, and Marcus's claims about his healing abilities, her protective instincts kicked in with full force. As a doctor, she had seen too many vulnerable people exploited by individuals claiming supernatural healing powers. "This could be dangerous, Sarah," Margaret said, her voice tight with concern. "We don't know anything about this boy's background or his true motivations. What if he's building up to asking for money? What if these movements are coincidental and he's taking credit for natural recovery? What if he's somehow manipulating you physically in ways that could cause harm?" Each question reflected legitimate medical concerns, but they also revealed her struggle to accept something that fell outside her professional understanding. Sarah felt torn between her mother's protective love and her own growing certainty that Marcus's gift was real and beneficial. She understood her mother's skepticism, but she also knew what she was experiencing in her own body. The sensations, the gradually increasing control, the sense of awakening she felt during their sessions, these were not products of imagination or manipulation, but genuine physical and neurological changes that defied medical explanation. The evening ended with an agreement that felt more like a negotiation than a family decision. Sarah would be allowed to continue her sessions with Marcus, but only under certain conditions. Margaret would arrange for comprehensive medical testing to document exactly what was happening, and she would personally meet with Marcus to evaluate his character and intentions. If any of the tests showed potential for harm, or if Margaret detected any signs of manipulation or fraud, the sessions would stop immediately. Dr. Margaret Chun approached her daughter's case with the same methodical precision she brought to her most challenging surgeries. She arranged for a comprehensive battery of tests at the hospital where she worked, calling in favors from colleagues in neurology, orthopedics, and rehabilitation medicine. The testing would be the most thorough evaluation Sarah had undergone since early childhood, utilizing the most advanced imaging and diagnostic equipment available. The results, when they came in, confounded every medical professional involved. The MRI images showed Sarah's spinal cord damage exactly as it had appeared in previous scans. There was no evidence of nerve regeneration, no sign of new neural pathways, and no anatomical changes that could explain her newfound motor control. Yet the nerve conduction studies, electromyography tests, and movement analysis clearly demonstrated that signals were somehow traveling from her brain to her lower extremities with increasing efficiency and precision. Dr. James Harrison, the neurologist Margaret had consulted, spent hours reviewing the test results with growing bewilderment. "Margaret, I've been practicing neurology for 30 years, and I've never seen anything like this," he admitted during their consultation. "According to every test we have, Sarah should not be able to move her feet. The nerve pathways that control those movements show no signs of function. Yet she's clearly demonstrating voluntary motor control that's improving daily." The medical team proposed several theories, each more unlikely than the last. Perhaps there were microscopic neural connections that their imaging couldn't detect. Maybe alternative neural pathways had developed over time through some unknown compensatory mechanism. Or possibly the original diagnosis had been incomplete, missing subtle but crucial details about the extent of the spinal cord damage. None of these explanations fully accounted for what they were observing, but they offered more comfortable alternatives to accepting that something beyond current medical understanding was occurring. Meanwhile, Sarah's progress continued to accelerate. What had begun as simple toe movements had progressed to ankle flexion, then to movement in her knees, and finally to the ability to shift her weight while seated. The improvements followed no timeline that medical literature would have predicted, progressing faster than any documented case of spinal cord recovery and defying the established understanding of nerve regeneration capabilities. Margaret found herself caught between her scientific training and the undeniable evidence of her daughter's recovery. As a surgeon, she had witnessed many cases that seemed miraculous to patients and families, successful operations that had seemed impossible, recoveries that had exceeded all expectations, and outcomes that had defied statistical probabilities. But those cases had always been explainable within medical frameworks, even if they represented the extreme positive end of expected outcomes. Sarah's situation was different. It challenged not just statistical expectations but fundamental principles of anatomy and neurology. Margaret was being forced to consider possibilities that her medical education had never addressed, that healing might sometimes occur through mechanisms that science had not yet identified or understood. The prospect was both humbling and frightening, suggesting that her profession's understanding of the human body, while extensive, might be incomplete in ways that had never been acknowledged. For months after meeting Marcus, Sarah experienced the moment she had dreamed of her entire life but had never dared to believe might actually happen. It was a quiet Thursday afternoon at the community center during what had become their daily session together. Marcus had been working with particular focus that day, his hands moving in the complex patterns that seemed to guide the awakening of neural pathways throughout her lower body. The sensation began as it always did, with warmth and tingling spreading through her legs. But this time, something felt different, more powerful, more complete. Sarah felt an overwhelming urge to stand, a compulsion so strong it seemed to come from every cell in her body simultaneously. Without conscious thought, she placed her hands on the arms of her wheelchair and began to push herself upward. Marcus stepped back, his eyes wide with anticipation and wonder. Sarah's legs, which had been passive passengers in her wheelchair for 17 years, suddenly engaged with purpose and strength. Her knees straightened, her feet pressed against the floor, and with a smooth, natural motion that felt like the most ordinary thing in the world, she stood up. The moment stretched between them, filled with all the weight of impossibility made real. Sarah stood there, swaying slightly as she found her balance, but unmistakably vertical and supporting her own weight. The sensation of standing, feeling the floor beneath her feet, experiencing the world from this new perspective, sensing the pull of gravity in an entirely different way, was overwhelming in its familiarity and strangeness combined. "Try walking," Marcus said softly, his voice filled with quiet encouragement. Sarah looked down at her feet, then back at him, then took the first deliberate step of her life. Her right foot lifted, moved forward, and settled firmly on the ground. Then her left foot followed, and suddenly she was walking, not with the careful, measured steps of someone learning to walk again, but with the natural rhythm of someone who had always known how. They walked together around the small garden behind the community center, Sarah's steps growing more confident with each movement. She found herself laughing with pure joy, tears streaming down her face as she experienced the simple miracle of walking on grass, feeling the ground change texture beneath her feet, and moving through space under her own power. Marcus walked beside her, his face glowing with satisfaction and happiness, offering steady support without taking any credit for what was happening. The walk lasted only about 10 minutes before Sarah began to feel fatigued, but those 10 minutes changed everything. As she settled back into her wheelchair, now a choice rather than a necessity, both she and Marcus knew that this was just the beginning. Her body was remembering capabilities it had never actually lost, awakening to possibilities that had been dormant rather than destroyed. That evening, Sarah called her mother at the hospital, her voice shaking with emotion and excitement. "Mom, you need to come home right now," she said. "I have something to show you that's going to change everything." The conversation that would follow would challenge Dr. Margaret Chen's understanding not only of medicine, but of the nature of healing, possibility, and the mysterious ways in which human beings sometimes transcend the limitations that science has declared absolute. Dr. Margaret Chen's homecoming that evening was unlike any moment in her career or personal life. When Sarah stood up from her wheelchair in their living room and walked across the carpet to embrace her mother, Margaret experienced something that went beyond professional surprise into the realm of profound spiritual and intellectual transformation. Watching her daughter move with grace and confidence, Margaret felt the foundations of her medical worldview shifting in ways that would reshape her understanding of healing forever. The weeks that followed brought a parade of medical consultations, second opinions, and attempts to document and understand Sarah's recovery. Specialists from around the country reviewed her case, proposed theories, and conducted additional tests, but none could adequately explain what had occurred. The medical community's response ranged from fascination to skepticism to outright dismissal, with some colleagues suggesting that the original diagnosis must have been incorrect and others proposing psychological explanations for what was clearly a physical reality. Marcus, meanwhile, handled the attention with the same quiet dignity he had shown throughout their friendship. When Margaret finally met with him formally, she found herself facing not the charlatan or manipulator she had feared, but a young man of remarkable maturity and wisdom who spoke about his gift with humility rather than pride. He made no claims about being special or chosen, describing his ability as simply one of many ways that people could help each other heal and grow. "I don't understand it either," Marcus told Margaret during their long conversation in the hospital cafeteria. "I just know that sometimes people's bodies know how to heal themselves, and they just need someone to believe in that possibility with them. Sarah always had the strength and the ability. I just helped her remember that it was there." His explanation was simple yet profound, suggesting that healing might sometimes be less about fixing what was broken and more about awakening what was already present. Sarah's recovery continued to progress over the following months. She regained full mobility in her legs, returned to regular physical activity, and began planning for a future that included possibilities she had never allowed herself to consider. She decided to pursue a career in rehabilitative medicine, inspired by her own experience and her desire to help others discover their own capacity for healing and growth. The impact of Sarah's story reached far beyond their immediate family. Margaret began incorporating a more holistic approach into her surgical practice, paying greater attention to patients' emotional and spiritual needs alongside their physical treatment. She started collaborating with alternative healing practitioners, not as replacements for traditional medicine, but as complementary approaches that might address aspects of healing that conventional treatments couldn't reach. Marcus eventually found stable housing and began working with a rehabilitation center where Sarah volunteered, helping patients who had been told their conditions were permanent discover their own possibilities for recovery. His gift was never scientifically validated or fully explained, but its effects were undeniably real for many of the people he worked with. Years later, as Dr. Sarah Chin graduated from medical school with a specialty in rehabilitative medicine, she reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. The wheelchair that had once defined her limitations now served as a powerful reminder of the importance of never accepting limitations as absolute truths. Her story became a testament to the mysterious ways in which healing can occur and to the profound difference it can make when someone believes in possibilities that others have declared impossible. The bond between Sarah and Marcus remained strong throughout the years, built on the foundation of that transformative moment when a homeless boy with an unexplainable gift had looked at a girl in a wheelchair and seen not disability, but unlimited potential waiting to be awakened. Their friendship had changed both their lives and challenged everyone around them to reconsider the boundaries between possible and impossible, between hope and reality, and between the healing that science can measure and the healing that transcends all measurement.